Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. We're discussing Rush, and we've made it to Signals. This was released in 1982, and it is their 9th studio album. So, it's generally acknowledged that Signals represents the start of the controversial synthesizer years. And I think that's very much true. You know, at this point they had, the transition had been complete. In the late 70s, they made their name for themselves doing the prog thing with the extended songs and the conceptual lyrics and whatnot. And, the previous two albums before Signals, Permanent Waves and Moving Pictures, to me represent a two-phase transitional period from the prog thing to the synth thing. And, what the end result is something still very heavy and rocking. All throughout all of Rush's albums, at the forefront, Rush is always, a hard rock band. Whether they're doing long prog songs or, synthesizer, based songs or what, they're still always a heavy rock band. And I think that's a really influential thing. Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails in the Rush documentary mentions this album as being a huge influence because it was the first time you heard those synth tones, but in a heavy rock sort of a format. So that's very interesting. But it is a very, very different beast to the Rush that people had gotten to know before this. They're definitely they'd achieved a new modus operandi, I suppose. It is the same guys and it has the same attitude, and it's still very, very creative. But it does feel almost like a totally different band. It's very obvious when you listen to Signals that the days of songs like Cygnus X1 are long behind them. But that's cool. It recharged their batteries, and having a big stylistic change is what propelled them through the 80s and allowed them to sustain their career. The other band that changed very drastically is, of course, Genesis. But a lot of the hardcore early Genesis fans, I think Genesis takes a little more heat for selling out than Rush do. Rush's fans, I think, for the most part, stuck with them a lot closer than some of the early Genesis fans. But I might be wrong. But yeah, as for the sound of the album, like I said, I keep mentioning synthesizers, and that is the runaway story. The synths on this album, and indeed most of the other 80s albums, are very, very dominant, and it really does change the sound palette quite a bit. Geddy Lee had been toying around with synthesizers all the way back to 2112. But in the 70s, it's much more of a supplementary instrument. The core focus of the sound palette in the 70s albums is Lifeson's guitar. It's all about that heavy rock and roll, thrashy kind of a style. And the synthesizers, they played the odd melodic line, or they'd help with Siegs and just kind of fill the space when the space needed to be filled. Whereas at this point, the synthesizers are an integral part of the compositions of the songs. Geddy Lee at this point was writing with all the synthesizers, so naturally it's going to have that big change in sound. And a lot of people, when they talk about the 80s period of Rush, they say, oh, well, the synthesizers just, overpowered Lifeson's guitar. And I disagree with that, because Lifeson is still very active on all of the 80s albums. It's the big difference with Lifeson's guitar is that his tone changed. He started playing with cleaner tones and experimenting with those sounds, rather than the heavier, distorted feel of the early albums. And he's doing more in the way of like arpeggios and whatnot. But it's what's really interesting about all the albums is the texture that they achieve. Like I said, the synthesizers don't completely overpower Lifeson's guitar, but the synths and the guitar work together to create a very layered, textured sound, and I think that's what makes these albums so good. And they're still creatively, in their prime in a lot of ways. They hadn't, like I said, I don't think they changed their sound to be commercial by any means. They were still following their own muse. But the texture thing is what makes the album, or what makes the songs of the 80s proggy, I guess. I guess that's the question, is 80s Rush progressive? And I would say yes. Certainly on like the whole category of the music being difficult to play. You remember in the 80s, this is right at the peak of Geddy playing synthesizers with his hands and his feet, and singing and playing the bass. And there's lots of sequencers on this album and the other 80s albums, so all the band members are triggering sequencers here and there. So it is still immensely complex music and very challenging to play. What's different is that it's less obvious. You know, in the earlier Rush days, you know, it's very obvious when Neil Peart does a crazy drum fill, or you know, there's a bass run or a guitar solo. Whereas in this era, in the '80s, because there's so much going on in the mix, those those little bits of intricate arrangements and the cool chops and playing are more subtle. They're there, but you gotta look for them a little bit, which is really cool. But yeah, anyway, back to Signals. This heralds the '80s period, so I'm kind of trying to sum it all up. Signals is a very good album. Every time I listen to it, I really there's a lot of songs that stand out that I really enjoy. It's not my favorite of the '80s albums, but like I said, it is really good. Lyrically, it's very thematic. You know, I wouldn't call Signals a concept album, but there is a thematic thread that runs through all the tracks here. And I think it's, you know, sort of the existential vibe of, you know, chasing your dreams and the obstacles that come in one's way in order to realize your dreams, which is a very Peart sort of a thing. I think that really sets the tone for a lot of his lyrical style following this album. But it means that the songs are all coherent, you know, both musically and lyrically. They all, you know, fit nicely into one package. So it is a well balanced album. The album cover isn't, it is a very iconic album cover, but it certainly isn't as cool as the Moving Pictures album cover. People moving pictures that are emotionally moving pictures, and it's all being set for a motion picture. It doesn't have that many layers, but the dog and the fire hydrant is very iconic, and of course we get the Subdivisions at the back there. They have funny nicknames for themselves. Like Alex Lifeson is Lurks. I know Peart is Pratt. Well, I always forget. Geddy Lee must be Dirk or Schmeng, I'm not sure, but it's all their nicknames are hidden in the blueprint, so that's kind of a cool thing. But yeah, we'll digest the tracks then, shall we? So the album opens with Subdivisions, and the very first thing we hear is a Synth Pulse in 7/8. Of course, the big hit from the last album, Tom Sawyer, one of the big hits, has a synth line in 7/8. This is more of a pulse, though. We just get that boom, 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 boom. Yeah, it's kind of a very harsh, abrasive intro to the album, and then the whole band kicks in. You know, and Lifeson's just playing along with the synth line. And you know, it's a great sort of, you know, grand opener, and it builds very nicely. You know, there's a few cool rhythmic arrangements when Peart starts doing the 16ths between the bell and the hi-hat. That's really cool. And you know, it really sets the tone for the album and the whole '80s synth period. You know, that intro is just so layered with synth parts. You know, after the 7/8 switches to 4/4, and we get the boom, 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 boom. That's the synth going, and it's also the melody's also there as well. But there's also a lot of bass playing on the song. You know, once it kicks in and the song proper starts after the intro and whatnot. You know, there's all kinds of great playing, and you know, it's just a very powerful song. Actually, it's very bleak. You know, it's nothing like any of the songs on Permanent Waves, which is such an upbeat, optimistic album. This is much darker album. The lyrics, of course, you know, deal with you know. The stifling nature of growing up in a subdivision and trying to realize your dream, and you're in this sort of gray matter between the excitement of the city and the unknown of you know, the country below. So it is quite bleak, and I think a lot of it is taken from you know, Peart's experiences as a young person, kind of dealing with, you know, bullying and the struggle to be cool and whatnot. You know, it's high school sort of troubles, I guess. But of course, it's got the iconic Subdivisions. That part that pops up during the chorus. I think that is an early sample. That was sampled from a news anchor in Toronto. So yet another tie to their roots. You'll notice that I've been talking about all these little connections that they make to Toronto and you know, their home base. And I think that's cool. No matter how big they got, they always threw in little nods to home. So that's cool. But yeah, as I said, Subdivisions is a great track. It all winds its way up. It's very well arranged. When it gets to towards the end, we get great Alex Lifeson guitar solo. He kind of makes his presence known amidst all the synth sounds. And you know, when we finally get that last big vocal stanza, you know, restless dreams of youth, and Peart cuts the time with the China cymbal there. The energy, it takes the energy level to you know, another stage, and it's one of those great powerful Rush moments and the big ending with all the drum fills and all that. And you know, it is a great song. It was a big hit for them as well. Gets a lot of airplay around here. I'm not sure how much airplay it gets other parts of the world, but it's also a live favorite. It's played live quite a bit. Great song. Moving on to track 2, we get The Analog Kid. Now this is more, we get to see a whole lot more of Alex Lifeson on this track. Of course, it's got that big riff, and that's great. It's great to hear that Lifeson is still, you know, all over the place. You know, the song, most of the song anyway, has that, well, parts of the song I should say, has more of a classic Rush tone with the guitar, bass, drums, power trio sort of setup. But the synths do creep into it and become more integral as the song goes on. Yeah, it's a cool song. Again, it's about being, you know, really young and suddenly, you know, feeling the desire to leave home and take on the world, which is a cool lyrical concept. I really like, you know, it's funny with the synthesizers in Rush because sometimes, you know, sometimes they can sound very cold and abrasive, and sometimes they feel very warm and inviting. And the chorus to Analog Kid has one of those warm, inviting synth patches. You know, the you move me, those whole sections. I love the synth line underneath it. It creates a real nice cushiony bed for the rest of the song. The second half of the song is just great. We get a fantastic, you know, classic Alex Lifeson shreddy guitar solo. Very intense solo at the end. And again, it's great to see him powering through with all this new technology that's swirling around him. And yeah, great song. What more can be said? Definitely a highlight moment for Lifeson, especially the solo towards the end. Moving on to track 3, we get Chemistry. Now this is more of an album track. You know, this one isn't. It certainly doesn't stand out to me. It's okay. There's parts of it that I really like. But yeah, definitely not a contender for my favorite on the album by any means. There's a really cool Lifeson guitar lick that comes in. It's kind of integral to the structure of the song. But when you first hear it, it's just shredding, like really fast notes, and then it kind of settles into just a really fast repeated pattern. But it serves as a textural thing. Like it's not just him shredding. You know, it is integrated within the synth lines and the synth stuff that's happening. So that's really cool. I also really like the chorus, you know, the I2I, H2O, that whole section. Again, that's that warm synth sound. Ding, 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 ding. I always thought that was really cool. Interestingly, this is the last time that Lee and Lifeson get a writing credit for the lyrics. Peart still put the lyrics together, but I guess it was an idea of Alex and Geddes, and they decided to, you know, kind of give Peart their rough idea, and then he perfected it and honed it down. So that's interesting. Yeah, like I said, it's an okay song, not one of the best on the album. We move on to track 4, Digital Man. So we get Analog Kid and Digital Man. That's kind of cool. Now this is one of the controversial songs, I feel. I think a lot of Rush fans I think there's a number of Rush fans that are, you know, see Digital Man as you know, the representation that their prog years are done or whatever. And I certainly disagree. You know, it shows them bringing in new influences. You can see there's a bit of a reggae influence there. Although it's not that they're listening to reggae. I think it's that their reggae is getting filtered through the Police. They're listening to the Police, and then you know, that's kind of what's giving their you know, what's contributing to the sound of these songs. But I think Digital Man is a great track. It's a real highlight for Geddy. Geddy's got a lot of really great groovy playing on there, and you know, I love the swingy sort of reggae section, and then it's a great contrast, a great juxtaposition when the chorus comes in, and we get that sequencer bit. You know, plays fast forward just as long as he can, but he don't need a bed. He's a digital man. It just changes so abruptly from that swingy boom, goes from that to dun 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 dun. So I think that's really cool. I mean, even though it's such an abrupt change and a huge contrast, it does, you know, it does fit together strangely. It is certainly quite well arranged, but very well sung. And like I said, that's really Geddy's moment on the album, I'd say. 6 minutes long. You know, it's certainly not an epic by any means, but you know, they let the song breathe and they let it take its time. And like I said, they're happy to groove around on something, which is great. I'm definitely a fan of Digital Man. One of the times I saw them live was one of the years they brought it back, so that was one of the obscure tracks that they were playing live that I was lucky enough to see, so that was really cool. Then we flip the record over, we make our way to side 2. And side 2 opens with The Weapon. Now, I really like this. This might be my favorite track on the album. I think The Weapon is a real highlight, really good song. It is, of course, part 2 of the Fear series, series that was released backwards. Part 3 was on Moving Pictures, and that's Witch Hunt. And part 2 is The Weapon. This is another moment on the album where I think Lifeson really shines. And this is where I really disagree that everyone talks about how the synthesizers overpowered Lifeson, but I mean he's got so many great highlight moments on this album and the other '80s albums. I don't really understand that. But that main lick that Lifeson plays, that's just so great. It is clean, it's not the traditional Lifeson sound, but it's just a great lick. And the whole song is resting on this bed of bubbling synths. This repeated pattern would have been a sequence pattern, just bubbling underneath. It's really, really cool. And the song itself is very grand and epic, and we got nothing to fear but fear itself. Big epic chords that come in there, which is nice. And the middle section is the real winner for me, because it goes, it mellows right out and gets very, very dynamic towards the middle, and it's almost like a cinematic scene change, and that's stuff that reminds me of the 70s period, the proggy period. So that's really, really cool. And then it's the guitar solo that steals the show. Lifeson gets a really quite a long guitar solo, which is really nice, and it starts out in that quieter dynamic bit, and as the solo builds, the music underneath builds behind it just beautifully, and it is a spine-chilling moment. It's definitely one of the highlight moments on the album for me. Really, really good. The Weapon is just ace. Fantastic track. I wish they played this one a little bit more, actually. I don't think it's quite as good as Witch Hunt, but all the Fear tracks are really, really great, actually. So that's all quite cool. Anyway, we move on to track 2 of side 2, track 6 overall, New World Man. This was another big hit for the band. It's not one of my favorites on the album. Again, it feels a bit like an album track to me. Again, the Police influence I think is really, really strong here. It's got that white reggae vibe, right? And it's almost like an updated version of Vital Signs from Moving Pictures. I always thought Vital Signs is kind of the odd duck out with the songs on Moving Pictures. Vital Signs probably would have sat a lot more comfortably along these songs. But New World Man is almost like, it's the same idea as Vital Signs, but with a few notable changes. For one, it's a lot more upbeat. It's got a much more positive kind of vibe to it. Vital Signs is very dark. And there's more of a laid-back groove to New World Man as well. It's not as urgent as Vital Signs. It's unfair that I compare it so much to that track, but I've always had that feeling. And again, it starts out with that sequencer. And the intro is quite cool, actually. We get Lifeson just kind of arpeggiating the chords, and then Geddy Lee's playing the melody on the bass, which is kind of a cool, interesting thing. But yeah, it still feels like an album track to me. It was a big hit, and it's certainly probably the most accessible track on the album. But it's an album track for me. It's okay. But track 3 of side 2, Losing It, is another one of those forgotten Rush gems. I think Losing It is a brilliant track. It reminds me a little bit of Different Strings from Permanent Waves, and it's one of these songs that it's easy to forget about because there's so many other Rush hits that you end up hearing, and then it's not until you go back and revisit the album and you go, holy shit, that's a really strong moment. And I think Losing It is one of those moments. It's absolutely fantastic. Notably, it has a violin, an electric violin solo, which is one of those rare moments when they did invite an outside musician to come in and play with them. Possibly one of the reasons that they haven't played it live quite so much is that, well, they're not going to hire a violinist to come on tour and do one solo a night every show. It's certainly not worth the effort, but yeah, it's just really, really good. It opens with the arpeggiated synth line. And it's very dramatic. I mean, again, I really get a feel of the 70s Rush when I listen to this, it's very stately and dramatic, and it almost feels kind of like a movement piece. It's not a verse chorus thing. The synth arpeggios open it up, and there's some kind of a great. It's not really a waltz, but there's a waltzy vibe to those opening vocal lines and the vocal melodies. and then it shifts tones for the big bell tolls for the section, and then, like I said, once it gets to that violin solo, it's game over. It is a classic Rush moment. It's an instrumental section that's, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's on par with like the Free Will instrumental section, which is something, because that's one of the great Rush moments. And I think losing it is of that same caliber. That violin solo and that whole solo section is just great instrumental section. And then it finishes off with the guitar doing that arpeggiated synth line. And yeah, what can I say? It's a great track, a hidden gem, a hidden Rush gem, losing it. And that takes us to the final track on the album, track 8 overall, track 4 of side 2, and we get Countdown. And it starts out with a familiar sound. It starts out with the same synth patch the Subdivisions started out with, so that's kind of a nice way to wrap the album out with a familiar sound. Playing a very different pulse though. Countdown, we got dun 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 dun, and it's all about a sense of anticipation with Countdown. Lyrically, it is about watching the space shuttle launch, which obviously would be a crazy moment, and you know, it ties in with that whole theme of, you know, following your dreams and whatnot, that is prevalent on the album, because, you know, in a way, you think about it, when you're a kid, you know, that's like the ultimate dream, to become an astronaut and go into space and explore the ultimate frontier. And you know, closing the album with a song about, you know, mankind realizing the ultimate dream is a great way to wrap things up. And it's a very upbeat song to finish the album out too. Like I said, a lot of the songs on the album feel quite bleak and it's very dark. But Countdown is just loaded with excitement and adrenaline, and you know, it's a happy note to end on. And it's got lots of great playing. You know, I love the rhythmic variations that come on. You know, lots of cool little things like that. And you know, what can I say? It's great. A lot of sound effects on there too. Like we hear like Mission Control talking, and the sound of the shuttle launching up into the stratosphere and beyond. So that's a cool way to close the album out. Countdown's now one of my favorites on the album. It's a great closing track. It closes the album much better than Vital Signs closes Moving Pictures, I'll say that much. But yeah, that is the album. You know, highlights are certainly Subdivisions, The Weapon, Analog Kid, and Digital Man, if I had to, and Losing It ahead of Digital Man probably. But yeah, that's it. So thank you very much for watching my near incoherent ramblings on Signals by Rush. So yeah, the next album is going to be Grace Under Pressure. We're going to go deeper into the 80s output, so stay tuned for more of that. If you enjoyed my ramblings, then please do like, subscribe, comment, all the rest of it. And you will see me in the future for more Rush chats. See you later.